Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Concordia University's Force-Space. Thanks so much for joining us for today's event, Pills, Clicks, and Bans, the auditing digital censorship of access to abortion and reproductive rights. We'd like to begin by acknowledging that Concordia University is located on unceded Indigenous lands in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal, and we respect the continued connections with the past, present, and future in our ongoing relationships with Indigenous and other peoples within the Montreal community. Here at Force-Space, we work with our university community to help mobilize knowledge. We co-create daily activities examining research questions and projects happening all across the university. And we're running today's event as a live stream, both to YouTube and via Zoom. So if you're joining us there and you have comments, questions, pop those into the chat and we'll do our best to read those out a little bit later on.
This project is part of a SSHRC-funded partnership engage grant between Women on Web and Concordia's Applied AI Institute, as well as the Digital Intimacies, Gender and Sexualities Lab, or DIGS, if you will, and started as a way of kind of piecing together, as Jane described, Women on Web's aggregated online experiences and exploring the direct impacts felt by the organization and their care seekers. So over the next 20 minutes or so, I'm going to walk you all back and explain kind of the lead up to what Jane just described, and sort of lead you through the plot points that led to the development of this digital rights program that they are now engaging with. So if everyone can see that. So what you see here, this is the first major incident that sounded alarm bells for Women on Web. This is right here, if you can see, is May 2020. So the COVID-19 pandemic has just descended upon the globe, and Women on Web lost nearly 80% of their site traffic overnight due to a Google Core update, which is what you can see depicted right here. For those of you who are unfamiliar, Google runs regular updates to its main search algorithm with the intent of ensuring when a user enters a search query, the results that they get are the most relevant to what they're searching for. And I'll get into this a little deeper later on, but for now, the image in all its drama was literally a jumping off point into Women on Web's current digital rights work. Google's algorithm evaluated Women on Web's website quite unfavorably, is what you're seeing. And therefore, the website was rendered more or less invisible, meaning it was no longer ranking highly in search results as it had been prior to this. So up until May 2020, up until this point here, WoW had faced censorship in certain countries such as Spain and Turkey, as Jane described. But this was a huge drop-off from an international search platform. And so this triggered a pivot to start investing time and resources into understanding these online ecosystems that were not only vital to their services and those in need of their services, but are now vital systems to most of us and impact how many people access information. So as you can see here, the website never recovered that traffic that it was receiving before, and has endured many core updates since, I think about 15 to 17 in total now, which is not entirely a loss, and I'll explain that a little bit later on, but really quite devastating to observe. So given this, as you can see, the traffic never was brought back in the same way. So the impact on the consultation requests was felt almost immediately. As you can see, this had a pretty significant and long-lasting impact on Women on Web, and more specifically, their care seekers. By 2022, their consultation request numbers dropped by nearly 12,000, just right here, due to, at that point, several damaging core updates. And they've been able to bring those numbers back up again, as you can see, as it starts to climb back up for 2024, and this past year has also been another increase. And I should clarify that these numbers, these are only represent folks that filled out a consultation request, so these are not folks that necessarily fully completed the service. But still, very impactful for the organization. So for the purposes of this report, we first compiled all the data sources Women on Web has and has had in operation since 2020. So using that May 2020 incident as a jumping off point as well for this research. And then started to piece together the data available to us in aggregate of what suppression and censorship look like for women on web as a whole. And this included reports of takedown incidences on social media pages, analytics from their website, the number of mirror sites created to circumvent regional censorship, ad campaigns, financial reports, and their impacts on the service, such as the consultation numbers that you just saw. So after evaluating these data points, there were two really significant plots that emerged. The first one was the instances and nature of suppression on Women on Web social media pages specifically. And then the other was the complex factors of web traffic and online censorship that together presented an overarching challenges for the organization. So I'm going to go through these two stories one by one, and then we will visit some common themes that resulted at the end. So these are just some examples of what suppression looked like on social media, and then some regional sibling site traffic from Google represented on the other side. So the first story is the instances observed on Women on Web social media pages. So to give you a quick look at what Women on Web's current social media presence is, Women on Web operates in 16 languages and currently has 10 active Facebook sites. As you can see, 3 are in Spanish and intended for specific audiences. They have 9 Instagram pages, 1 Blue Sky page, a LinkedIn page, a Twitter or an X account that is on the chopping block, if you will, and 1 TikTok account that is recently no longer active. So while all these pages are visible, not all of them are on a post schedule, so a few of them have been paused, and currently only 2 Facebook pages and 3 Instagram pages are producing content. Okay, so that's an overview of what their social media presence looks like now. So in an effort to continue to move chronologically from May 2020, from September 2020 to February 2021, Women on Web faced a concentrated number of takedowns on their social media accounts with 7 instances over 3 platforms. So you can see the timeline here. It started with their Polish Instagram page, which went down September 8th to September 21st. And then again on September 29th, 2020 for about 3 to 4 months. Their Korean Twitter page went down September 11th permanently. And then their Polish Facebook page went down September 28th, also permanently. However, a new one is now active in its place. Their English Instagram went down December 2020 and was restored shortly after that. And then in January 2021, their Malaysian and Indonesian Facebook pages both went down permanently. And then finally, in February of 2021, their Facebook business account, which is the account that is needed to run paid ad campaigns on the platform, received a permanently restricted status, which is ongoing to this day. In total, the report found 23 instances of suppression across Women on Web social media pages from September 2020 to November 2024. Of the 23 incidents, 11 were removals of single posts, 2 were instances of demotion or shadow banning, 4 resulted in temporary suspension of the account's entire page, and then 5 resulted in permanent suspension of the account's page. And then finally, the last is that permanent restriction on the organization's Facebook business account, effectively minimizing their ability to run ad campaigns and increase visibility to those potentially in need of their services. So as you can see, the incidents occurred entirely on Meta platforms, Facebook and Instagram, aside from the one incident on Twitter. So to better interpret this data, the social media case studies were then classified into 3 separate categories through which we could break them down. So policy and guideline violations, ad campaigns, and the details surrounding the Facebook business account. And then finally, the platform moderation surrounding political events. So these are the 3 themes that emerged from the inventory as having the greatest impediment and thus the greatest impact on how the organization was able to share information within social media spaces. So the first one is looked at policy and guideline violations cited by the platforms upon appeal of a takedown by the organization. So out of the 23 incidents, community standards violations were cited for 13 takedowns. One incident in 2024 received no response at all after multiple appeals. And then 9 incidents received no response, or the response was not recorded. So as Jane mentioned before, organizational memory was really essential for taking down some of these incidents and moments of suppression. Several cited insensitive and offensive content. There was 1 violation of age restriction guidelines, and then 7 violations of community guidelines on regulated goods and drugs. 3 violations of just general community guidelines without specification of why, and then 1 technical glitch. So it was noted that none of the notifications clearly outlined which aspect of the content was violative or inappropriate. For example, the content removed for violating Meta's age restriction guidelines. Where's this guy right here? Was for a job posting that was put up by the organization on the main Instagram page. And another post was the text abortion dictionary, which was on the copy of the post, and it was taken down for violating Meta's guidelines on regulated goods and drugs. Since all of the incidents happened on Meta platforms, apart from the one on Twitter, Meta's community guidelines standards policies was reviewed, and each incident was then cross-referenced with the guidelines available at the time. And for many, the infraction could only be inferred based on the policy outline, and in the case of the abortion dictionary post, it was unclear why the text violated this specific policy, and Meta at no point clarified this for the organization. So next we looked at ads. So as mentioned, Women on Web's Facebook business account intended to run ad campaigns in an attempt to reach more care seekers was flagged for violations of their ad policies so frequently that they received a permanently restricted status. So since 2021, WOW has attempted to run over 200 ads through Meta, 130 of which were rejected at first submission. And after the rejections were appealed, about half of these 130 were allowed to run. So this is a huge impediment to the possible scope of the organization's work, as various ad campaigns conducted by Women on Web have proven to be successful in their reach, including ad campaigns that were run on the French Facebook page Avortement Afrique, and ad campaigns that have been run on Google subsequently. So this is an example of Meta's response to one of Women on Web's ad appeals. So these ads were disapproved because they violate our advertising policies. Facebook does not approve of language in the ad copy that is likely to offend users and suggests using language that is central and factual about the product or service and removing the user from the focus as per the cited policy. So these are the excerpts that this response was referring to. So do you have an unwanted pregnancy? And calculate how far along you are in your pregnancy, which is not very offensive. And then we have another example here of an ad that was proposed and rejected. And this one that says, Our trained help desk is guided by doctors and provides confidential support 7 days a week in 16 languages. And the reason it was rejected was not for the copy, but in fact, due to the link that was embedded in the post, which landed at Women on Web's consultation page for access to abortion pills. So the third finally looked at some of the political context surrounding the timing of some of the takedowns. So for instance, in October 2020, Poland's Constitutional Tribunal ruled in favor of overturning access to abortion in cases of fetal malformation, issuing a near total ban of abortion in the country. It's in the months leading up to this decision that Women on Web's Polish pages went down for several months, beginning in September, and during this time, the country faced ample political fervor in the form of protest and public discourse. So another example on this side, if I can ever learn to use this little laser pointer, took place in November 2024, so shortly after the American election of Donald Trump and the first election post the overturning of Roe v. Wade. In the United States was the systematic takedown of 3 of Women on Web's Instagram accounts at once, including their Korean page, their Latin American page, and their US page. Both of these moments were at peak times when public discourse around abortion was really high and ultimately resulted in the silencing of participants on the part of the platform. So I'm going to shift to the second story, which is looking at an overview of Women on Web's web traffic and instances of censorship. So this is sort of a whole new set of data that proved to be quite relevant for the purposes of this research. So I'm going to bring you back one more time to the Google Core Update, the fateful Google Core Update of May 2020. So as mentioned before, this drop signified a vulnerable position for Women on Web's website, particularly for its evaluation by search platforms such as Google. So search engine optimization specialists or SEO specialists and digital strategists Women on Web has worked with since this time have revealed much of the traffic leading up to May 2020 was not entirely traffic that represented care seekers. Several factors contributed to this. For one, Google's algorithm has gotten more sophisticated over the years, and Google searches have become more targeted towards users' behavior, as opposed to simply the search words that they used, meaning time spent on certain pages and then time it took to return to the search page itself. The COVID-19 pandemic also had a factor in this, as Google relied on and prioritized health-related information from hospitals and state-mandated health sites, since little was known about the virus at the time. This meant that any traffic that was related to searches for pharmaceuticals, such as mifepristone or misoprostol, were lost, as Google no longer ranked Women on Web as a website that was a credible option. Finally, what this graph does not show is that specific traffic, or rather users who were specifically searching Women on Web, did not fall during this time. However, the impacts of these algorithmic updates, particularly ones that result in such a steep decline and even the loss of traffic that is maybe not as useful to the website, ultimately means fewer individuals have exposure to accurate and empowered sexual health information. So these are the most common search phrases and keywords care seekers typically plug in to Google when they're looking for search results such as Women on Web. So with 4 out of the 5 top phrases seeking the organization out specifically, the keyword data tells several stories about the traffic coming to Women on Web, indicating that people are intentionally seeking Women on Web services and access to abortion care. The references to cytotech as well that you see, which came up as sort of as one of the top Arabic search phrases, also indicates people are looking for information on how to use cytotech or misoprostol for self-managed purposes, as opposed to, say, treating an ulcer, which is another possible use for misoprostol. The keyword data also shows the diversity of regions in which a high number of people are looking for services and information. Poland, for example, which you can see here and here, which is their blog, Polish for Opinion and Opinion Forum, has some of the most restrictive abortion laws in Europe at this point, thanks to the shift in legislation that we recently visited, and is a top country for women on web services. Abortion is illegal in Brazil, as you'll see, Portuguese, where many Portuguese-speaking users are based. And while abortion is incredibly varied in Arabic majority countries, many have highly restrictive abortion laws, meaning women on web services and the information they provide are essential in these regions. In addition to women on web's web traffic, censorship of their website creates another layer of complexity in maintaining the site's visibility. So here are two cases Women on Web has faced. In February 2019, Women on Web first realized the main website was censored in South Korea through, as Jane enjoys, an UNI report, which later revealed the site may have been blocked as early as August 2018. So Women on Web pursued legal action, but the lawsuit eventually was lost in 2023. An appeal was then filed in 2024, but this also resulted in another loss. And I believe there are updates that Venny can maybe walk you through later. But as of 2024, the lawsuit was at a loss. Likewise, in early 2020, the main Women on Web website was blocked by the Spanish government, which resulted in several years of ongoing legal battles to reinstate the website in partnership with Women's Link Worldwide. The Spanish Supreme Court ruled in Women on Web's favor in October 2022 and ordered the partial unblocking of the site. Yet despite this, the site remains blocked. The Spanish Agency for Medicines and Health Products has since informed the Supreme Court that it could not comply with the order because it was not technically possible to unblock the site. To counter global censorship, Women on Web developed a mirror or sibling site strategy, in which sites that carry the same content and provisional access that lead care seekers to the same resources, but with a different URL. This allows the organization to pop up sites when they get censored to create what they call a whack-a-mole approach to circumvent blockages. And this strategy has been quite effective. However, if the sibling sites themselves also get blocked, which has happened, it takes quite a while to build up that traffic again, as depicted here in looking at the Korean sibling sites. So this is the new one that's been created, and this is the line depicting having to rebuild the traffic to the site again. So the sibling sites also give a deeper analysis of the dynamic traffic coming out of various regions. So you can see the differences here in what the traffic and the analytics look like for these sibling sites. This is search traffic from Google. Of which, so for the purposes of this report, we went through Poland, Korea, and the Middle East and North Africa, or the Arabic sibling sites, which were observed. But here is to just sort of give you a view of all of them. So you can see the traffic that's coming to the website is very different and dynamic based on the context. So final outcomes, some final thoughts on what came out of these two unique narratives developed from Women on Web's data. A few of the common themes that emerged centered around first, opacity. So both at the hands of the organization's interactions with social media and search platforms, as well as the behavior of the algorithms employed by the platforms themselves. The black box manner in which moderation was felt by Women on Web through social media suppression and Google's evaluative search algorithm makes navigating these systems really difficult and quite costly. The organization's digital marketing budget jumped 242% from 2020 to 2021 in response to the Google Core Updates impact, and another 42% in 2022. By the end of 2024, Women on Web had spent nearly 430,000 Canadian dollars on digital strategy and specialists to counter these online challenges. This naturally goes hand in hand with another theme that arose involving the patchwork governance exhibited by big tech platforms. The experience of inconsistent policing and moderation that left the organization in a position to have to parse out when and how they might be censored or suppressed contributed to the need for an ongoing and ever-adapting strategy. This inconsistency continued in both Meta and Google's evaluation metrics as well, exposing environments fertile for errors, misunderstandings, and potential manipulation. So an example of this is a Polish scam website called poron.org was discovered in 2021 that copied and pasted Women on Web's site content. And because the site was evaluated by Google's algorithm as more optimized, it filtered to the top of Google's search engine results and outranked Women on Web. This same tactic is often used by crisis pregnancy centers to mimic abortion care language and then dissuade abortion care seekers from getting support. Finally, in the face of all these systems, organizational memory and strategy became paramount. As Jane mentioned before, archiving and analytics were oftentimes insufficient or subject to change on the platforms themselves, and were only complete from the work the organization had done to document and organize their experiences. This meant access to optimization resources were vital, and without them, essential services that provide accurate online health information and supplement mainstream providers, such as Women on Web, would potentially be quite vulnerable to many of the challenges that have been described. And with that, I will leave the lessons learned to the discussion with my panelists after the break. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Erin. I think we're going to take a break now, but I just wanted to check to see if there was any questions. If you want to take any questions directly now, Erin, if anyone here in the space? No? Okay. They can also come up and ask you probably directly during. Okay. For those of you joining us on Zoom or online, we're going to take a bit of a pause, and then we'll kind of come back for the panel in a few moments. Am I right? Yes. That's what's happening. Okay, hi everyone. Welcome back to the second part of today's event, Pills, Clicks, and Bans. This is more of a panel discussion, and enough for me. I'm just going to pass it over to Associate Professor of Communication Studies, Fenwick Mckelvey. Over to you, the moderator for this afternoon.
Okay, thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you for everybody online. It's really my delight to welcome everybody here and also to kind of give some kind of a high-level context for this research project and for some of the themes that this project speaks to. And I think really one of the things that we've done is gone from an organization really being affected by these issues, being able to see it so clearly and eloquently articulated as a problem in Erin's presentation. So what I kind of want to talk about a little bit about this panel is where did we come from to get here? What are the kind of key themes and where do we go? And so with that, I just want to kind of talk about two kind of key points before getting into introducing my amazing fellow panelists. And I think one part just to emphasize is that it's always been a really interesting project because what we've really been able to talk about, and if anybody is dealing with concerns about filter bubbles or algorithmic suppression or the internet these days or what ChatGPT is saying, is that this project has always been really driven by a clear sense of a kind of normative goal that Women on Web is a trustworthy source of health information online. And if we begin with that assumption, it really starts to simplify the challenges that we face of how do people across the world gain access to reliable health information. And what becomes really clear is that from a global human rights agenda, Women on Web is servicing and advancing reproductive justice, and yet at the same time, it faces internationally domestic opposition to that mission. And what becomes so apparent and challenging is that platforms are largely complicit in these forms of algorithmic suppression. But yet, the organizations affected lack access to the data, lack the ability of articulating what these consequences have been, and as well as not having the kind of voice of government to understand and realize these kind of lived impacts. And so, to me, this case has always been crystal clear in as many of us navigate the many ways that platforms intervene in our lives as a crystal clear example of what are some of the consequences of that. And I think it's in a broad sense of kind of allyship to the many sexualities and bodies that are algorithmically filtered online, is to be able to kind of understand just how this works in this particular context. And so Women on Web is one of many organizations that are dealing with these issues. And we've been so lucky to be able to collaborate with them to be able to kind of advance and understand what these issues have been. The second thing I want to say is that this to me has always been something that is a real opportunity when we talk about interdisciplinary research. And so for those of the academics in the room, is trying to really emphasize that when we think about being interdisciplinary, it is a challenge, and it's something where part of the work is being able to kind of develop these context connections and discussions and dialogues. And to me, the kind of best part of this has been that when I think about this project, I think about everybody who's contributed around this table to make this possible. And it's really fantastic to see the collaborative spirit that has led, I think, to this taking place. And I will also just say credit to Dmitri for that collaborative spirit for joining us to talk, I think, about just the broader context here. And I think that to me is really remarkable. And it also speaks to one of the things that makes Concordia really unique is being able to think about how we can talk about technical problems, understanding the social context which they operate, working and trying to ensure that our research has a meaningful impact, and also trying to help develop these kind of connections. And certainly it's one of the things that I think is work and research I'd love to see, and say it's just a big credit to the table for making this type of work possible. Now, with that, I'm going to back off and start talking about everybody on here. So, as you know, Erin, I would also like to say, is not only a researcher on this project, he's also a researcher at Women on Web, and is also in their second year of the master's program in media studies in Concordia University, and is working on a project looking at the emails that Women on Web receives from Canadians, even though Women on Web does not operate in Canada, and trying to understand just this kind of the website as a frontline interface as people are trying to navigate these access to information. And so what you've seen in the presentation is very much a high level, but the emails themselves really speak to just that kind of lived experience, in some ways the kind of helplessness in the ways that people are trying to navigate. So it actually is a lot of difficult work of reading these, but also of making sense and making those voices heard and meaningful in an important way. Then on my right is the fantastic Stefanie Duguay, who is a Concordia University Research Chair, and also the director of the Digital Intimacy, Gender, and Sexuality Lab. And one of the parts of the DIGS Lab has always been to advance digital methods on campus, and Steph will mention that, but you can see part of this is where this dialogue is coming through, is that not only do we have an organization dealing with the impacts, but we're also thinking about ways of advancing the methods of studying those impacts. Then we have Venny Ala-Siurua, who is the executive director of Women on Web, who's been there for 6 years, and is someone who I think has been trying to kind of think about and advance the organization's missions in navigating its move from being primary in person to a digital care provider, and having to kind of navigate and make sense of just an organization as it adjusts, adapts, and navigates an increasingly hostile international political environment. Then finally, we have Dmitri Vitaliev, who is a digital security consultant and trainer working extensively in the human rights and independent media sector. And I'd also like to say Dmitri has been a very active and longstanding member of kind of the Montreal critical tech community, and the organization Equality is, I think, one of the kind of really important organizations in Canada working at advancing the intersection of human rights and internet access. And it's been an organization I've known for many, many years, but I think it really kind of highlights just that type of work about trying to think about the intersection between questions of cybersecurity, internet access, and human rights. And so this is kind of the panel itself to show the kind of range of perspectives, academic, practical, but also working at the kind of space of the information environment itself. So what I wanted to begin with was talking a little bit about how this project fits into the evolution of women on web itself, and how this kind of really pushes that. What do we mean when we talk about access? And so I was wondering, Venny, if you'd like to start just talking about women on web and its kind of evolution.
Thank you, Fenwick, with the question. So as my colleague Jane earlier said, it's been 20 years now since we were set up, 2005 as the first ever international telemedicine abortion service. We really started off as just being this radical online project, and today we've grown to become this, I would say, a global operation. We're providing over 30,000 abortions per year, operating in 16 different languages across 180 countries. But in the beginning, 20 years ago, it was a very controversial idea to do anything like we're doing today. We were like an experimental, empirical project, and I don't know if we were ever supposed to become a 20-year-old nonprofit like we are today. And in these past 20 years, we obviously seen abortion access evolve a lot. There's been a lot of countries who've taken progressive steps. There are, of course, a lot of countries very close to us right now who've taken steps backward. Another thing that we've seen also is that the internet has changed quite a bit over the last 20 years. Especially my colleagues who've been around longer than I have can really speak to the fact that it has become harder and harder to produce, disseminate information on the internet. It's harder and harder to stay visible on the internet. And this is crucial for us, because if people can't find us, they can't access the service. So what we also see is that not only is the internet becoming more closed and regulated and fragmented, more and more people are going online. Like more and more people are going online because they expect to be able to receive information and also receive services. So it's not only us sort of online abortion providers, but the modern abortion seeker today also is relying on internet to access healthcare. So it's abortion providers and abortion seekers that need free and open internet to access healthcare. And you were talking about access, right? So for us, access has always been two things. It's access to information and access to the abortion pills. Because when you put those two together, you have a safe abortion service. If you have access to good quality pills, no matter if you're getting them from the internet or from the clinic, and you have access to information telling you how to use them, you can have a safe abortion at home without any medical supervision. And access to information is so crucial for the conversation today too, because without it, there's no safe abortion, and it's no wonder that we see more and more censorship and digital suppression happening online, because restricting access to information is a very powerful way to restrict access to abortion too. I will hand it over to my colleagues if you want to continue from there.
Well, I thought actually I wanted to pick up Dmitri, when Venny's talking about the kind of decline of the open internet, I think that's one of the parts that your organization has really been on the front lines of witnessing. I mean, I just thought it might be helpful to also give a bit your perspective on women on web in the context of this larger change we're seeing online.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, and we've been proudly working with Women on Web for several years now, helping basically the freedom of expression and association on the internet, which is what equality does. So yeah, let's just briefly take a look at the different types of censorship that exist at the moment. We've been talking here about platform censorship, but there was also another slide that pointed out that the actual website or several of the organization's websites are blocked in different countries. So this is more website censorship, basically decreed by the government or some sort of ministry inside the government that internet service providers in that country should block these addresses, should block their people from being able to access these types of addresses. There are other types of censorship as well. The censorship of brute force, meaning attacking a website until it falls over, until it's no longer able to serve its readers. This was a very common tactic, particularly in the early 2000s and 2010s, where, again, either state actors, but more often than not, non-state actors just pretty much somebody with a grudge and a credit card, could pay for an attack to happen on the website they didn't like. And my organization, Equality, we've actually stood up a service back then called deflect.ca, which protects Women on Web and similar organizations from this type of cyber attack. There is also one more type of censorship. I think it's very insidious and the one that is most difficult to counter, really, and that is self-censorship. Whilst we do not see self-censorship, on the part of the brave activists of Women on Web, we can imagine that people around the world know that there are repercussions for things they do on the internet, for things they search for in the internet as well. Particularly in countries that have made an effort to showcase several people, to put them into prison, to give them fines, so on and so forth. And even now, as we look south to the States, in many of the American states where abortion is illegal, you have to ask yourself, are women often self-censoring themselves by not searching for this kind of information in fear of repercussion? Now, Equality is by and large a technology organization, although we do advocacy and awareness raising and capacity building. But the topic of self-censorship, for example, is a very difficult one to counter. Whilst we do counter as much as we can the censorship of cyber attack, and we also create technology to help people get around network censorship. So Women on Web can be accessed in countries where it is blocked, people using our tool. We have a tool called Sino, or people use VPNs as well. So yes, by and large, the internet is another very contested playing field in our world today, with all sorts of nefarious, decreed, criminal, non-criminal activity going on to disrupt people's ability to interact with each other and to communicate with each other freely.
And Erin, I was wondering, as you're hearing Dmitri talk about just the shifts that we're seeing online and the types of censorship, what's been the lived impact? You mentioned just, I think, the bit of the cost, but how would you think about the reallocation of resources that Women on Web has had to do to kind of address these questions of digital censorship?
Yeah, it's huge. I think Venny could probably participate in answering this as well. But especially as a frontline worker, Jane earlier mentioned that we've been blocked in parts of the Philippines. The Philippines, for example, was a pretty big country for Women on Web for a period of time. And, we are now having to watch in real time people respond to being blocked and not being able to find the website, not even being able to use a VPN to try and bypass some of those blockages. And so, they're contacting us directly, but it's out of knowledge that this has happened because they already have the knowledge that the service exists. And so it's, that's sort of the surveillance of the direct impact on the care seekers. And then for the organization itself as well, Women on Web does so much outreach all over the world. And certainly this has just integrated into that outreach work. But it's not always clear, I think, for folks, it's the relationship between digital rights and access to accurate healthcare. It's not always linear, it's not always a direct line. And so, that sometimes that outreach can be a little bit fragmented. And the work that Women on Web does is so vital with respect to provision and putting people in touch with support, that, it sometimes can be lost that essential piece is access to information. and information that's accurate. But Venny, I don't know if you want to add to that as well.
No, maybe I could just build up on that, just to add that a lot of the places where we work, we are the only way to access safe abortion. So in the case of Philippines, it's not like there's any alternatives out there that they can turn to. So that makes it ever more very difficult for our frontline team that are answering these emails from people figuring out that the website is actually blocked. And Philippines, but around the world, social media censorship, website censorship, it's delaying people's access to care. Or in the worst case scenario, they might not be able to access care at all on time. And then sometimes when the website gets down, it doesn't mean that it creates a vacuum. So there's going to be some information is going to be available there. And oftentimes it's misinformation, disinformation. It's going to be these crisis pregnancy centers showing up high on the search results, which are basically designed to mislead you and deter you from having an abortion. So digital censorship can have life-altering consequences for people trying to access basic healthcare, basically.
Well, I think one part that's important also to emphasize is that we talk about these companies with record profits. I think what are the ways that we don't recognize just the costs of the inattention or externalizing some of the consequences of an algorithmic update. And so I think one thing also just to emphasize is Women on Web and the cost that now this takes in Women on Web's time is one of the ways that we often can think about platform power, is that really what a lot of the work of the organization has to do is trying to adapt and adjust and understand what's going on very, very large companies that seem often at times kind of indifferent to some of the reasons request, as Erin's presentation showed around terms of advertising. And I thought that actually is a helpful segue to talk about one other side of this project, which is kind of both the methodological and also this wider context, is that, Steph, your work has, I think, looked at both the kind of wider area of thinking about digital suppression of sexualities, just beyond just abortion access, to think about the kind of consequences for queer youth online. And so I think one part of where this project came from was how there was this dialogue about digital suppression, or just how platforms are working, and how do we understand how those platforms are working. And I was wondering if you could talk just about the way you see this kind of problem of platforms within your own work.
Absolutely. Yeah, well, and it's not an easy research question to start to address, right? The question of how do we investigate something that is disappearing? How do we investigate something that's being made less visible? And so that as a starting point gives you a lot of complication there when you go into trying to address what platforms are doing. But it's absolutely imperative, right? Because as we've been talking about today, platforms are not neutral. Where we go online, it's not the open web of decades ago. It's populated by these intermediaries, right? So you may feel like, oh yeah, it's just in my muscle memory that I go to Google to search something, or I go to Facebook because that's where I feel like I get updates. But everything you see there is in an ecosystem that is dynamic, and that the people who develop that ecosystem, the people who own it, they have control over that, right? And so we see that very much in what gets advertised, what doesn't get advertised. But as folks around the table have been saying, the information that people can or cannot access is very important. And so it's across research like this or any other research in which their vital access to information is being challenged by these intermediaries, one of the only ways that gets a change in that is to show a body of evidence that can put pressure on these platform owners to change. We see that a lot of the time the changes they make to platform governance, to their rules, to their guidelines, their takedowns, is in response to media coverage. It's in response to the pressure that that we can put on them when we have a body of evidence to say this is happening. Unfortunately, it puts a lot of onus on organizations like Women on Web, but that's the main way that we're seeing change come about.
Just to follow up on that, when you're talking about a body of evidence, like one trend, one part about this project is a bit about digital methods. And I think that it's helpful just for those listening to know maybe what we mean by digital methods, and then how that work has gotten harder, which I think might be another side to Venny and Dmitri's comments about the kind of decline of the open internet. Just how do we study social media, and how does this project kind of reflect those changes?
Yes, so digital research methods is an area that's always changing because the technologies that we use are always changing. And so a lot of the time, what we mean by sort of more classic digital research methods is using digital tools or digital means to understand a phenomenon, understand what's happening. You can see that in, I think, mainly the web traffic data. Using this sort of behind the scenes, what do we know? How are people reaching our website? How are they not? This drop after the Google Core update, that's kind of a more technical way of kind of looking in, peering in at the data that we have and seeing what's happening. As platforms have updated their terms of service, as they've closed their APIs, their application programming interfaces, it makes it really difficult to look under the hood and see what's happening on a platform like Facebook or Instagram. And so that's also where we are expanding the realm of what we think of as digital research methods. Another pillar of digital research methods is using many different research approaches to critique digital technologies, to critique these platforms. And so you can see that in the social media case, where we drew on the evidence that Women on Web has to provide a sense of what the platform is doing, right? And that's where we get pivotal information about, okay, when they're taking down certain posts, they're flagging particular words. And as you pointed out, some of these words are not offensive. Some of them are correct references to anatomy, right? And having that level of detail allows us to push back on what platforms are doing. So that's another inroad. And another pillar of digital research methods is how what's going on online also sensitizes us to what's going on offline. So that part where Erin connected what we're seeing in the trends around takedowns and less visibility also correlated with what's going on politically in different countries, that's also another way of using research to unveil this evidence.
And I think one important part of this context is understanding the unique opportunity this collaboration presented. And I think, in Steph, in your work, you've talked about patchwork governance and just some of the ways, and just some of the ways that really researchers have this both have a piecemeal account of what's happening on social media and are also trying to make sense of what are largely piecemeal operations where there isn't a coherent policy. And so I think that's one thing that does come up in the evidence is further justification of that kind of theorization of how platforms are working, not as this kind of well thought through machine, but actually sometimes not actually giving enough care or attention to kind of these critical information issues. And I think that's one reason this whole collaboration kind of started was just the opportunity that presented itself with working with an organization that had data to share and trying to think about how we could partner to kind of better articulate that data. But I think that did create a challenge, or maybe a part of the journey itself was just realizing organizational memory and what that organizational memory was. And I don't know whether Venny or Erin wants to talk about that, but I wonder if you could, just maybe reflect on what this collaboration has meant, I think, for Women on Web and thinking about itself and how it remembers what it's experiencing.
Please go. No, please. Yeah, that proved to be a huge issue. Not so much, props to Women on Web. Women on Web has taken has done meticulous archiving of very ephemeral data and some of the strategists and the search engine optimization specialists that Women on Web works with, kudos to them. Because without that, it just, the platforms themselves, they oftentimes the analytics that are available are just not sufficient in presenting this kind of data and giving this kind of analysis. They are often, as Venny and Jane mentioned, they're subject to change frequently. There was the website analytics changed in 2023. And so everything before that was lost. And again, it's only thanks to Women on Web's, to the organization's commitment to keeping records that we have the data that came before that, right? And so that also, if there are staff changes, if there is not a structure in place for the organization to keep those records, it's just gone. And, that was a huge issue in sort of the methods for this research, because again, it's subject to change so quickly, and if there's nobody there to capture it, then there isn't the evidence that there's any wrongdoing, which is really vital. But Venny,
No, you said it well, and I think you said it in your presentation too. It was that 2020 Google Core update that was kind of a rude awakening for us. It's like, oh my goodness, like we really depend on these updates, and care seekers are depending on these updates to reach us. So it was only then when we started waking up to the fact that we need to start documenting things, but it was all very organic and we didn't really know what we were against. And I think even today, like things are happening so rapidly. Like a couple of months ago, we were censored in 6 different countries. Today, the information is 13 different countries. So it's moving rapidly, but 20 years ago, we were set up as an online abortion service, and we are turning, and I'm proud of it, but we're also a digital rights organization. So we've had to develop like completely new capabilities, raise resources for this. So it's changed us completely, and I'm glad that you think we're meticulously documenting our data, but we should probably get better at it and more on top of it, because things are changing fast.
Dmitri, before you begin, I just want to make one key point. Is that a key takeaway of this is that it's just how surprising I think it was for me about the differences of what's kept on a platform and what's not. You think that these platforms are largely advertising driven. So Jill Tolentino just as a new piece of the New Yorker about the kind of experience of being a woman on the web who's pregnant, trying to avoid being caught by the algorithm and being targeted. So in one sense, there's massive data collection in the service of advertising. And yet when you're talking and in your phone findings, getting a coherent picture of when your ads are being taken down was completely piecemeal. And I think is one just very coherent takeaway, is that the tools that platforms provide to hold them accountable are nascent and declining in some ways. And I think that takes and puts it on the work of an organization like Women on Web to put that together. But Dmitri.
Yeah. Now, for me, obviously, the elephant in the room is that all of the platforms that were mentioned there are U.S. organizations, U.S.-based organizations that must obey U.S. legislation. And as it's turning out recently, as it's coming to the fore, will obey U.S. legislation before they will obey any other legislation, even if the case, involves a European person in doing some sort of searching on a European web. Now, these big tech firms are really bending over backwards at the moment to carry favor with the current government. And it may be that the issues groups like Women on Web have faced are small potatoes compared to what could be coming down the line when, a flip of the mood will cause, all abortion-related terminology to be banned from American big tech platforms. How do you prepare for that kind of situation? And if you don't, you know that you will lose out by having to, deal with the crisis when it's already here. Chance favors the prepared mind. It is possible that training AI could be one way to stem this coming this possible coming problem. Now, truthfully, a sizable collection of large AI organizations are also US-based, but not all of them. I think when it comes to AI, there are various actors around the world which are becoming more and more important. So training AI to also be able to guide people that are asking it questions now instead of searching for that in a web browser seems to be important. And yes, of course, the big migration from US big tech firms, I think that's more of a societal problem for us all, but also something that I think is essential in order to maintain independence and self-determination on the internet of the future, teaching our users to, about other companies which are there and having our governments help propel these companies, to the fore so that they become a little bit more competitive with American big tech. So all in all, we are observers of how legislation that is made in another country is affecting the way our organizations can function on the global open internet. That has been the reality. We've all accepted it as long as those companies, played by the rules that we considered acceptable. Now, when they change those rules, we need to figure out what is our course of action. And we need to figure that out before they change them.
We'll just add to that, one of the unfortunate fallouts, whether you're talking about people seeking abortion care or LGBTQ plus teenagers wanting information about sexual identity, or other folks online who are being censored and suppressed, is that they're being pushed out of these spaces, right? Something like Facebook is a household name, and some people believe it to be, maybe if not a neutral space, a sort of common and everyday space where maybe I should be able to find information that I can rely on. And instead, when you remove the visibility of an organization like Women on Web, you're pushing people to say, if you want that information, you have to go elsewhere. You have to go to different corners of the internet. And it's kind of pushing people back into these sort of like secret areas and can increase stigma. It can increase the issues that people already feel when they're in a society that may not, be protecting their rights, their fundamental rights to information and access to care. And so it's a completely upside down sort of thing, right? But it's just making problems that we've had for a long time around the stigmatization of people and their rights worse and more marginalized.
And I want to go to questions here from the audience, so I'll just maybe have a last kind of round of questions to the panel. But I think it is really important in all the panelists, you're seeing just slightly what's at stake, whether it's in Steph's work about trying to just talk about youth, the youth, but I mean, basically people of all kinds feeling more and more excluded and marginalized from the internet. Like I think a project that often was associated with the early web was trying to make more inclusive spaces and then becoming increasingly more exclusionary, being able to kind of say that this idea of access to free information is becoming polluted, and that you cannot provide effective health information online like you could, as well as just also the way that technology has been largely politicized for what seems more increasingly like a techno-fascistic movement in certain parts of the world. And so it certainly, I think, important to kind of contextualize this. I did want to not end completely on a downer note and also just recognize that there's important work being done. And I was wondering if anybody on the panel would just like to share some advice to digital rights activists or abortion rights activists who want to help spread their information. Is there ways of doing this work better or ways that you've learned of this project that might help others encountering these common issues?
Just keep at it. Like, I think what Dmitri was saying, like, of course, people are self-censoring themselves, but abortion activists and activists in general, we shouldn't. The forces against us, they're very well funded. They know all the tricks and get their websites up in the search results and whatnot, but like we just need to continue providing information. We are sometimes told, like, why don't you not use the word abortion so you won't get censored? But like, we cannot do that. We're just going to be perpetuating stigma. Like, we need to continue saying what we're doing so that we bring legitimacy to our work, and we're normalizing abortions. It's healthcare. Everybody should be able to access it freely.
I think also sharing, as Steph is talking about methods and in kind of looking at how the organization amassed all of this information, sharing that as well with other activist communities, because that feels like, figuring out how to document and then sharing with other communities how it's done and developing some shared knowledge around how to develop some practical methods for other organizations. Felt very important in coming out of this research anyway.
Yeah, I think make choices online as you would in real life, as you would in the physical world as well. Particularly, activists, they don't necessarily take the easy path in the physical world. They fight for what they believe in, they make choices, they may, give up fast food or, make certain choices as consumers. These choices can also be made online. Don't take the easy path. Think about where you're getting information from, how you're getting your information from. Don't take the shortest route. Invest in educating yourself about other options. I think, live your activism not through clicktivism. It's not about, the groups you join or the things you like necessarily online, but the choices that you make, where you search for information, where do you choose to interact, communicate with friends, with organizations, so on and so forth. There are options out there. Organizations like mine are creating these options and trying to make them better and more robust and user-friendly. Find them, support these options so that the internet remains a diverse playing field.
Okay, now we have some time for questions before I'll say a few last remarks, but I was wondering if anybody in the audience or anybody online might have some questions for us or from this panel.
Anyone online has questions, pop them into the chat. We can read them out. Here in the space, just raise your hand. I'll bring a microphone over. Anybody here?
I don't have a question. I know that's not really usually allowed, but I just wanted to thank you for being as part of this panel and kind of shedding a light on these situations. I've worked as a director of a LGBTQ nonprofit. I've worked in LGBT health services, both here in Montreal, which is a principally very accepting place. But these online platforms are not just based in this physical location that we find ourselves in. They have a global reach. And I think that as actors inside these small spaces, sometimes we forget that we are experiencing something that is so global and that is connected to so many other people's experiences, and that every time, an ad gets taken down, a lot of the time as like social media people, we're like, oh my gosh, what did I do wrong? And I think that abortion, it carries a certain weight. There's a certain stigma to it that is, I don't have to go into right now, but it is a very useful case study because it is that canary in the coal mine. It has these massive changes legally that people are experiencing, and that, politically, a lot of different activist struggles can experience as well, like a change of political approach to a certain topic can change how you experience things online so drastically. And so I really appreciate this panel for shedding a light on what we can do to document and to not feel so alone in our experience of this. So I just wanted to thank you all.
Thank you for that comment. It reminded me of us 2020, because that's precisely how we felt when the Google Core update happened. What did we do wrong? And then we started going more social media, trying to spread information there. Accounts started getting blocked. posts were getting taken down. What did we do wrong? And then we started speaking to other people and other organizations. We realized that this is systematic. It's nothing to do with our organizations, our SEO teams, our social media managers. Like, this is happening everywhere. And I think that's been a big part of our work, but also I think what the research is now contributing to is, yeah, like you said, spreading information that people are able to understand what's happening to their information online, articulate what's going on, and maybe find the right terminology also to like do advocacy, and make change through that. So thank you for your comment. It's very relevant.
Any other questions here in the space? I'm not seeing any questions online at the moment. Anyone else? Okay.
Oh, yeah, I don't need one. Well, Venny, I actually do think that that's kind of helpful, because that is one of the threads in the research project is, and I'll take this time just to say that this panel is the prelude to the final outputs of the presentation of this project being made available. So we'll have in the coming months available on the DIGS website and the Digital Intimacy, Gender, and Sexuality Lab's website. What's the DIGSLab.net. DIGSLab.net and Women on Web. Some of the outputs of this. So a guide to organizations about doing the similar type of data work, as well as the 2 reports that Erin presented. But I wanted to ask on that, and so look forward to that, but also just to say that one of the goals of this project was to help other organizations. And I was wondering, Venny, if you could talk a little bit about just your work in building that network.
Yes, so it's exactly like I started already saying that it started 2020, thinking that we were the only ones experiencing, the only ones who are like losing traffic during Google core updates and getting their accounts taken down. But when we started talking, like we realized that there's quite many of us. Actually, anybody trying to do anything online is probably affected by digital censorship. So it's become actually like bread and butter of our work, and our digital rights program is to connect with other organizations. We do workshops, we do trainings, we put out information, we do research projects together, and it's been really powerful because here, like Women on Web has been around for 20 years, so we've been able to accumulate a lot of understanding and technology. We're using technology to protect our website, so we're very privileged in our position. So a big part of our work is to try to help smaller organizations who don't have these resources to kind of make them have this head start. They, like Erin was saying earlier, like we spent 400,000 Canadian dollars on this work. This is obviously not available to all organizations. So a big part of our work is like, how can we give back? How can we do so that other people may might not be able to restore all their accounts, but at least we'll be able to tell them what's happening to their accounts and give them some tricks. And we've gotten savvier to circumvent censorship. We're still obviously cannot. It's still happening, and accounts are getting taken down. But we're getting smarter and smarter to circumvent that too. So that's information we want everybody to have available for them.
And I think one other piece, Dmitri, I think you talked about a little bit, was just this kind of turn and turn digital sovereignty right now. And I do think it's important also to think about what does that mean right now in terms of what's happening in Canada? You've talked about kind of the risk, but I'm just wondering, when you think about what does building digital sovereignty mean, what does that look like right now?
All right. I'll try to keep it short. I think as with everything, there's a yin yang to it. There's the positive and the negative digital sovereignty. We see several countries, building sovereign networks in order to better control their populations, in order to cut access to the outside world, whilst to maintain access inside that country themselves. Iran, for example, at the moment, has restricted international access for the last 3 weeks, yet national access remains. It's a project they've been working on for many years. So that's one form of digital sovereignty. At the same time, we see the European Union, and now we're seeing Canada as well, and other countries push also for digital sovereignty. I think this is more in order to kind of have local resilience to American big tech companies. So what does this mean? I mean, it's the whole stack as we technical people call it, really. Like if you look at it holistically, then being digitally sovereign means having your own infrastructure, your own devices, your own services, your own data centers. Something that's not really possible for every country to have, particularly in a global economy like we have here. I think most people actually mean resilience. They mean digital resilience, the ability to have sovereignty, self-determination for your own digital industry without necessarily having to rely on a digital industry of another country. What it means, I think, in our context is the social communications industry. There are no big social platforms in Canada at all anymore. There are a few small ones, but we don't really use them. There are no big Canadian email servers for those people who still use email. I'm one of them. When we have a crown corporation like the CBC serve video of its news program, it has to rely on an American organization, on Akamai, in order to be able to deliver that video. So it's almost impossible at the moment for, let's say, two people in Canada to communicate with each other without the US being present, either by the company that they choose to communicate over, or even by the routes that their messages take on the physical network to get from, Vancouver to Montreal. You can do a few tests, and like 9 out of 10 times, a message from Vancouver to Montreal will go through the US. So that means that this is a reality, but in the current context, this is a vulnerability as well. And digital sovereignty in this context means to get rid of those vulnerabilities, to reduce them by increasing your own capacities in this field. Now, Canada, I think, is one of the few countries that actually can do this quite well and have in the past, also in the technology industry, demonstrated that they can invest to safeguard and to grow a local industry here. We've done this, with the movies and video games and digital graphics industry. We've done this with the machine learning industry as well. So now, how do we do this for internet services and internet communications? How do we make local companies competitive enough in the face of big tech alternatives so that they have a chance to grow? And so that choosing them is more attractive for Canadians, not only on a moral principle, but actually, possibly more importantly, on the economic side of things as well. It's a difficult road to travel because we're starting a few years back. But we cannot, I think, abstain from it at all, especially because we see how everything is changing around the world, and big tech changing its policies and changing the way it does its business, changing the way what its priorities are going to impact Canadians, where it hurts the most. So digital sovereignty in this context means regaining the ability for Canadians to have self-determination on the network that is the internet.
Okay. Well, I just want to say before we close, just a couple last points. I think part of this research is really comes at an important time. Certainly, as Dmitri said, these discussions of digital sovereignty and digital resiliency are central. We also have more movement now talking about online harms and legislation being put forward around online harms. And here, I think you can really just center how, in rather talking about online harms in the abstract, you can think about the concrete ways that online harms are taking place and how do we address those. And so I want to say that in one part, this research is really relevant in the policy context right now. I also want to say that this project was supported by a SHRC Partnership Engagement Grant, which is quite transparently, the smallest of SHRC grants you can get. It's one of the few SHRC grants that actually can support partnerships with civil society organizations. But I also just think that's something to credit to everybody around this table for making it work with very little money and resources. I think there's a really compelling project, and I think it was through this group here that made it possible. But I just also want to kind of showcase just what type of work can be done when you are really trying to commit to this collaborative interdisciplinary work and the impacts it can have. As a last kind of point to say, I just want to thank the Fourth Space as always for being such great hosts. This was also in part made possible by the Applied AI Institute. So I just want to thank Deborah, and I think one of the parts for helping organize and make this possible. And I also just want to say is during my tenure at the Applied AI Institute, one of the things that was always really fantastic was seeing how it was growing and developing into a leader in kind of feminist research and feminist approaches to AI. So big credit to Lindsay. And I think this is certainly one of the ways that we've really tried to continue that mission, is actually put that into practice and try to think about what does it mean for a research agenda to really be putting those values into practice. And so with that, I just want to thank my really fantastic panelists for coming out here today, for joining, and for this discussion. And thanks for everybody online for listening. Have a great day.
Thanks, Fenwick. Thanks, everyone, for here joining us today. Thanks for your questions. Just going to close up the Zoom and the live stream now, but just remember that this remains available on our YouTube channel, and you should revisit it and share it. Have a great afternoon. Great weekend, too.